I was sitting on my back porch in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching the sunrise paint the McDowell Mountains gold when I heard the unmistakable rumble of heavy machinery coming down my street. It was barely 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I hadn't ordered any work done on my property. The sound grew louder, and that's when I saw it. A massive excavator turning into my driveway, followed by a dump truck and a crew of workers in hard hats. My name is Oliver Thornton, and I'd lived in the Sunset Ridge HOA community for 3 years. I'd built my dream home here, complete with a beautiful guest house in the back that I'd spent months designing and another 6 months constructing. Every permit was filed, every inspection passed, every box checked. That guest house was my pride and joy, where my elderly father stayed when he visited from Michigan, and where I ran my consulting business when I needed a quiet space away from the main house. I stood up from my chair, coffee mug still in hand, and walked toward the side yard where the machinery was heading. That's when I saw her, Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, standing at the edge of my property with her arms crossed and that smug expression she always wore when she thought she'd caught someone breaking a rule. "What the hell is going on?" I called out, jogging toward them. Patricia turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Thornton, good morning. We're here to demolish your unpermitted structure." "Unpermitted? That guest house has every permit the city requires. I have the documentation." "Not from the HOA, you don't," she said, pulling out a folder from under her arm. "According to our bylaws, any structure over 100 square feet requires HOA architectural approval before construction. You never submitted the plans to us." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Patricia, I built that guest house 2 years ago. You've seen it. You've been to my summer barbecue where people were literally using it. If there was an issue, why are you bringing it up now?" She shrugged. "Rules are rules. The board voted last night, and we're enforcing compliance. You have 10 minutes to remove any personal belongings before demolition begins." "Like hell you are." I pulled out my phone and started dialing my lawyer, but then something occurred to me. Something that had been bothering me for weeks now. About a month earlier, I'd been contacted by FBI agent Marcus Chen. He'd shown up at my door one evening, badge in hand, and told me something that had seemed almost unbelievable at the time. The FBI had been investigating several HOAs in the Phoenix metropolitan area for a massive fraud and extortion scheme. Apparently, some HOA board members were colluding with contractors to force homeowners into unnecessary repairs and renovations, taking kickbacks from the work. They'd been using their authority to threaten homeowners with fines, liens, and even foreclosure if they didn't comply. Agent Chen had suspected Sunset Ridge HOA was part of this network. He'd asked me to keep an eye out for any unusual activity, anything that seemed like overreach or suspicious enforcement of rules. He'd given me his card and told me to call him if anything happened. I'd thought he was overreacting. Patricia was annoying, sure, and the HOA was strict about their rules, but fraud? It seemed like a stretch. Until now. "Patricia, I'm calling my lawyer," I said, holding up my phone, "and you need to stop this immediately. The demolition is happening, Mr. Thornton. You can sue us later if you want, but the structure is coming down today." She turned to the demolition crew foreman. "Proceed." That's when I made a split-second decision. I held up my hand to the foreman. "Hold on 1 second." I turned away from Patricia and quickly scrolled through my contacts until I found Agent Chen's number. I pressed call and held the phone to my ear. He answered on the second ring. "Chen." "Agent Chen, it's Oliver Thornton from Scottsdale, Sunset Ridge HOA. You told me to call if anything unusual happened. What's going on?" "The HOA president just showed up with a demolition crew to tear down my guest house. She's claiming I didn't get HOA approval, but I've had this structure for 2 years, and suddenly they're enforcing this? It feels wrong." There was a brief pause. "Don't let them demolish anything. I'm sending officers now. Can you record what's happening?" "Yes." "Do it. Record everything. Get her talking about why she's doing this, who authorized it, anything you can. We're 20 minutes out." I hung up and immediately opened my phone's video recording app. Then I remembered something better. I had security cameras installed all around my property, and I'd recently added some high-definition cameras pointing at the guest house because I'd been storing expensive equipment there. I could access the feed from my phone, and better yet, everything was being recorded to cloud storage automatically. But I needed more than just video. I needed audio, and I needed Patricia to talk. I walked back toward her, holding my phone casually at my side, but with the camera pointed forward. Patricia, can we talk about this reasonably? This seems extreme. There's nothing to discuss. The violation is clear. But I've had this guest house for 2 years. You've never said anything before. She hesitated, and I saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. The board recently conducted a comprehensive review of all properties. Several violations were found. Yours is just one of many we're addressing. How many other demolitions are you ordering? That's confidential board business. The foreman walked over, looking uncomfortable. Madam, if there's a dispute about permits, maybe we should hold off. I don't want to be in the middle of a legal issue. Patricia's expression hardened. You have a contract with the HOA. Complete the job or we'll sue for breach of contract. The foreman looked at me, then back at her. I need to make a call to my boss. Fine, 5 minutes. Patricia pulled out her own phone and walked a few feet away. I seized the opportunity. I approached the foreman, keeping my phone's camera rolling. Hey, can I ask you something? Who hired you for this job? He glanced toward Patricia. The HOA president contacted us last week. Said she had several demolition jobs coming up. Wanted to establish a relationship. Several jobs? How many? She mentioned maybe 5 or 6 properties in this neighborhood over the next few months. Good money, so we were interested. My suspicion deepened. Did she say why all these properties suddenly needed demolition? He shrugged. Permit issues, code violations, that kind of thing. Not really my business. I just do the work once everything's cleared legally. He looked at my guest house. Though I gotta say, that's a nice structure. Seems a shame to tear it down. Patricia came back over, having finished her call. Well, are we proceeding? The foreman rubbed the back of his neck. My boss says we need to see the actual HOA authorization and any relevant permits or violation notices for liability purposes. I have the board resolution right here. Patricia pulled papers from her folder and handed them over. I tried to see what was on the papers, but she angled them away from me. The foreman read through them, his brow furrowing. This says the structure is a safety hazard. Has there been an inspection? The board conducted a visual inspection. Who on the board is qualified to assess structural safety? Patricia's jaw tightened. We have the authority to enforce our community standards. I'm not questioning your authority, madam. I'm asking about liability. If we demolish a structure claimed to be unsafe and it turns out it wasn't, that's a problem. Do you have an engineer's report? That's not required under our bylaws. I jumped in. Patricia, I have the city inspection reports from when the guest house was built. The structure passed every safety inspection. I can show you right now. City inspections are irrelevant. This is an HOA matter. The foreman handed the papers back to her. I'm sorry, but we can't proceed without proper documentation. My company could be held liable if this turns into a legal mess. If you want to get a structural engineer's report and proper demolition permits from the city, call us back, but not today. Patricia's face flushed red. You're in breach of contract. With respect, madam, the contract specifies legal and properly documented demolition work. This doesn't meet that standard. He turned to his crew. Pack it up, guys. We're leaving. I'd never been so relieved to see someone stand their ground. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. Fine. But this isn't over, Mr. Thornton. You'll be receiving violation notices and fines starting immediately. $50 per day until the structure is removed. You can try, I said, but I think you'll find that's not going to work out the way you expect. She gave me a suspicious look. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, I heard sirens in the distance. Patricia heard them too, and her expression shifted from angry to confused. What did you do? Me? Nothing. Maybe someone else in the neighborhood reported heavy machinery at 6 in the morning. The sirens grew louder, and 2 black SUVs pulled onto my street, followed by a Scottsdale police cruiser. Agent Chen stepped out of the first SUV along with another agent, a woman in her 30s with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. They both wore FBI windbreakers. Patricia's face went pale. What is this? Agent Chen walked up with his badge displayed. FBI, Patricia Henderson? Yes, but what? We have some questions for you regarding HOA activities. We can do this here or at our office. Your choice. I want my lawyer. That's your right, but we're still going to need to talk to you. He turned to me. Mr. Thornton, did you record the interaction? Yes, and my security cameras caught everything too. Good, we'll need copies of all of it. He looked at the demolition crew. You folks are free to go. Sorry for the confusion. The foreman looked relieved and quickly got his crew moving. Within minutes, they were backing their equipment out of my driveway. Agent Chen turned back to Patricia. Ms. Henderson, we've been investigating a fraud scheme involving several HOAs in the Phoenix area. We have evidence that board members have been colluding with contractors to force unnecessary work on homeowners, taking kickbacks from those contractors. We also have evidence of falsified violation notices, improper fines, and in some cases, attempted illegal foreclosures. That's ridiculous. I would never. We have financial records showing deposits into your personal account from 3 different contracting companies over the past 18 months. Over $70,000. Would you like to explain that? Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The female agent spoke up. We also have recordings of phone calls between you and several contractors discussing how to identify properties for enforcement actions. In one call, you specifically mentioned Mr. Thornton's property and discussed splitting the demolition and reconstruction fees. I felt my stomach turn. You were going to make me pay to rebuild it too? Patricia shot me a venomous look, but didn't answer. Agent Chen continued. We've identified at least 12 homeowners in this community who've been targeted with similar schemes over the past 2 years. False violation notices, excessive fines, threats of foreclosure, and in every case, specific contractors were recommended by the HOA board, always the same contractors who were paying kickbacks. I want my lawyer, Patricia repeated, but her voice was shaking now. You'll get that opportunity. Patricia Henderson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Agent Chen nodded to a uniformed officer who'd been standing nearby. The officer moved forward with handcuffs. I watched in stunned silence as they read Patricia her rights and cuffed her. She was crying now, mascara running down her face, all her earlier smugness completely gone. Agent Chen turned to me after they'd put Patricia in one of the SUVs. Thank you for calling me. Your video and security footage will be crucial evidence. We'll need you to come to the office tomorrow to give a formal statement. Absolutely. Can I ask how long you've been investigating this? About a year. We got a tip from a contractor who was approached by another HOA president about joining their network. He reported it, and we started digging. We found this whole web of HOAs, board members, contractors, and even some property management companies all working together. It's been one of the largest HOA fraud cases we've worked. How much money are we talking about? Across all the HOAs involved, probably close to $3 million. Individual homeowners were being hit with anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 in fraudulent charges. I thought about what Patricia had planned for me. Demolition costs, reconstruction costs, fines during the process. I probably would have been on the hook for at least $30,000. Probably more. They usually found ways to extend the timeline, rack up additional violations, recommend expensive upgrades that weren't necessary. He shook his head. It's a good thing you called me when you did. Once that guest house was demolished, proving the fraud would have been much harder. Over the next few hours, more FBI agents arrived. They executed a search warrant on Patricia's home, which was just 4 streets over from mine. They also went to the homes of 2 other board members who'd been implicated in the scheme. By noon, 3 people had been arrested, and the FBI had seized computers, phones, and boxes of documents. I gave my initial statement to Agent Chen in my living room, while other agents collected my security footage. I showed them every camera angle, every recording from the morning. The video clearly showed Patricia threatening me, the conversation with the foreman, and her reaction when the FBI arrived. This is gold, Agent Chen said as he reviewed the footage on his laptop. She practically confesses on camera. What happens now? Now, the U.S. Attorney's Office will review all the evidence and decide on charges. Based on what we've collected, I expect all 3 board members will be facing federal charges. Patricia Henderson especially. She was the ringleader, at least for this HOA. What about the other homeowners who were targeted? Do they get their money back? That's part of the legal process. Restitution will be part of any plea deal or sentencing. and homeowners can file civil suits for damages. There's also the possibility of a class action lawsuit. He closed his laptop. You should talk to a lawyer about your options. I will. What about the HOA itself? Does it just dissolve? Not necessarily. The HOA as an organization isn't guilty of crimes. Specific people are. The remaining board members who weren't involved will probably have to hold emergency elections. Bring in new leadership, maybe hire a professional management company to rebuild trust. It's going to be messy for a while. That was an understatement. The news broke that evening. Local news stations ran stories about the FBI raids in Scottsdale, the arrest of HOA board members, the fraud scheme. My neighborhood was swarming with reporters by dinner time. I didn't talk to any of them. Agent Chen had advised me to keep quiet until after the trial, and I intended to follow that advice. But my neighbors weren't shy. I watched from my window as reporters interviewed person after person. Some people were shocked, others were angry. A few admitted they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to fight back against the HOA. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors wanting to know what had happened, if I was okay, what I knew. I kept my answers brief. The FBI was investigating. I couldn't say much. Everything would come out eventually. One call stood out, though. It was from Sarah Winters, a woman who lived 2 blocks away. I'd met her a few times at neighborhood events. She was a single mother, worked as a nurse at Mayo Clinic, seemed nice but always stressed. Oliver, it's Sarah Winters. I don't know if you remember me. Of course I do. How are you? Not great, honestly. I saw the news about Patricia and the HOA. I need to tell someone what happened to me, and I thought you might understand. What happened? She took a shaky breath. Last year, the HOA sent me a violation notice saying my roof was deteriorating and needed to be replaced immediately. They said it was a safety hazard and an eyesore. They gave me 30 days to fix it or face daily fines. Was your roof actually bad? That's the thing. I didn't think so. It was only 8 years old. But I'm not a roofing expert, so I called a contractor to inspect it. The contractor they recommended, of course. He told me the roof was terrible, showed me pictures of what he said was water damage, told me I needed a full replacement, $28,000. I winced. Did you do it? What choice did I have? They were threatening $200 per day in fines. I couldn't afford that. So I took out a loan and had the roof replaced. The contractor the HOA recommended, of course. Her voice cracked. Oliver, I'm drowning in debt from that loan. I've been working overtime shifts, picking up every extra shift I can get. My daughter barely sees me anymore. And now I'm finding out it was probably all a scam. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Did you keep all the documentation? The violation notice, the inspection report, the contract? Yes, everything. I'm meticulous about that stuff. Why? Because the FBI is going to want to talk to you. You're exactly the kind of victim they're looking for, and you might be able to get restitution. Really? I can't promise anything, but Agent Chen told me that's part of the legal process. Can I give him your number? Or you can call him directly. I gave her Agent Chen's contact information. Thank you. God, I feel like I can finally breathe for the first time in months. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling sick. How many other people were like Sarah? How many families had been financially devastated by this scheme? I found out the answer over the next few days. As the FBI's investigation became public, more and more homeowners came forward. The number of victims in just my HOA grew to 18, and across all the HOAs involved in the broader scheme, there were over 100 victims. The stories were heartbreaking. An elderly couple forced to take out a reverse mortgage to pay for unnecessary foundation repairs. A young family threatened with foreclosure over false violations who sold their house at a loss just to escape. A disabled veteran who'd used his savings to pay for mandatory landscaping work that turned out to be completely unnecessary. Each story made me angrier. These weren't victimless crimes. These were people's lives being destroyed by greed. Agent Chen called me a few days after Patricia's arrest. I wanted to update you on the case. We've made 2 more arrests, board members from other HOAs in the network, and we've identified the contractors who were paying the kickbacks. Some of them are cooperating, providing evidence in exchange for reduced charges. That's good, right? Very good. We've built a strong case. The U.S. attorney is confident we can get convictions on all the major players. He paused. I also wanted to thank you again. Your quick thinking, recording that interaction, having those security cameras, it was the break we needed. Patricia's lawyers are already talking about a plea deal. She knows the evidence against her is overwhelming. What kind of sentence is she looking at? Federal wire fraud carries up to 20 years, with multiple counts, multiple victims, the financial amount involved. She's probably looking at 8 to 10 years, maybe more depending on what else we uncover, and she'll have to pay full restitution to all the victims. She has that kind of money. She has assets, a house worth about $600,000, retirement accounts, investment properties. We've already frozen everything. It'll get liquidated to pay back victims. She won't have anything left when this is done. I tried to feel sympathy for her, but I couldn't. She'd made her choices. She'd hurt innocent people for money. The case moved quickly by legal standards, though it felt agonizingly slow to those of us involved. Over the next 3 months, I watched the legal process unfold. The FBI's investigation expanded to include even more HOAs. More arrests were made. The story became national news, with reporters from major networks covering the case as an example of HOA corruption. I gave my formal deposition to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They asked me to walk through everything that had happened that morning, minute by minute. They asked about my prior interactions with Patricia, whether she'd ever hinted at the scheme, whether I'd noticed anything suspicious before. I told them about a few odd things I'd observed over the years. The way Patricia always recommended the same contractors for any work. The way she seemed unusually interested in people's property improvements. The time she'd tried to convince me I needed to repaint my house, even though I'd painted it just 2 years earlier. These people are predators, the assistant U.S. attorney told me after my deposition. They identify homeowners who won't fight back, who trust authority, who don't know how to challenge the system, and they exploit that trust ruthlessly. Why do people even join HO, as if they can become this corrupt? Most HOAs aren't like this. Most are run by well-meaning volunteers who just want to maintain property values and community standards. But HOAs have a lot of power. They can fine you, put liens on your property, even foreclose in some cases. And when corrupt people get control of that power, they can do tremendous damage. She tapped her pen on her desk. That's why this case is so important. We need to send a message that this kind of corruption won't be tolerated. In early August, 4 months after Patricia's arrest, the first plea deals were announced. 2 of the board members from other HOAs pled guilty to wire fraud and agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. They each received 5-year sentences and were ordered to pay restitution. Patricia refused to take a plea deal. Her lawyers insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been following HOA procedures, that the payments from contractors were legitimate consulting fees. The U.S. Attorney's Office decided to make her the primary defendant in a trial that would send a message to other potential HOA fraudsters. The trial was scheduled for October. I was called as a witness. I'd never testified in federal court before. The experience was intimidating. The courthouse in Phoenix was an imposing building, all granite and glass. Security was tight. I had to pass through metal detectors, empty my pockets, show ID multiple times before I even got to the courtroom. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, met with me beforehand to prepare. You're going to be a key witness. Your video and testimony establish the extortion attempt and Patricia's awareness of wrongdoing. The defense is going to try to make it seem like a simple HOA dispute, an overzealous board president enforcing rules. Your job is to calmly and clearly explain what happened, let the evidence speak for itself. What if I mess up? You won't. Just tell the truth. Answer the questions directly, don't elaborate unless asked, and don't let the defense attorney rattle you. They'll try to make you defensive or angry. Stay calm. When I entered the courtroom, I was struck by how ordinary it looked. I'd expected something more dramatic based on TV shows. But it was just a room with wood paneling, rows of benches, the judge's elevated bench at the front. Patricia sat at the defense table with her lawyers. She'd aged since I last saw her. Her hair was grayer, her face drawn. She didn't look at me as I walked to the witness stand. I was sworn in, and Jennifer Park began her questioning. She walked me through the basics: who I was, where I lived, how long I'd been in the Sunset Ridge HOA. Then she asked about the morning of the demolition attempt. I described everything exactly as it had happened. Patricia showing up with the demolition crew, her refusal to listen to reason, her threats of daily fines, the conversation with the foreman, calling Agent Chen, the FBI's arrival, and Patricia's arrest. "And did you record any of this interaction?" Jennifer asked. "Yes, on my phone and with my security cameras." "And is this the video you recorded?" She played the footage on screens positioned around the courtroom. Watching it again, even months later, I felt the same shock and anger I'd felt that morning. Patricia's voice came through clearly. "The demolition is happening, Mr. Thornton. You can sue us later if you want, but the structure is coming down today. And later, you'll be receiving violation notices and fines starting immediately, $50 per day until the structure is removed." The jury watched intently. A couple of them were taking notes. One woman looked visibly angry. Jennifer asked a few more questions, establishing that I'd had proper permits for the guest house, that Patricia had seen it many times before, that the sudden enforcement seemed suspicious. Then she turned me over to the defense. Patricia's attorney was a man in his 50s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit. He stood and approached the witness stand with a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thornton, good morning. I just have a few questions for you. Now, you testified that you had all the proper permits for your guest house, correct?" "Yes, from the city of Scottsdale. But you never submitted plans to the HOA for approval, did you?" "I wasn't aware I needed to." "The HOA bylaws are provided to all homeowners. You received a copy when you purchased your home, didn't you?" "Yes." "And those bylaws clearly state that any structure over 100 square feet requires Architectural Review Committee approval. That's in Section 12, Paragraph 4. Were you aware of that provision?" I hesitated. I don't remember reading that specific section. So it's possible that Ms. Henderson was simply enforcing a legitimate HOA rule that you had unknowingly violated? She'd seen the guest house for 2 years and never said anything. Why suddenly enforce it now? Perhaps the HOA was conducting a comprehensive review, as Ms. Henderson stated. Perhaps your property came up in that review. That's not unreasonable, is it? Given what we now know about her taking kickbacks from contractors, I think her motives were clear. The attorney's smile tightened. "Mr. Thornton, please just answer the questions asked. You're not an investigator or a legal expert, are you?" "No. So you can't actually know what Ms. Henderson's motives were that morning, can you? You can only speculate." Jennifer stood up. "Objection. The defendant's motives are a matter for the jury to decide based on all the evidence, not just this witness's opinion." "Sustained," the judge said. The defense attorney asked a few more questions, trying to make it seem like a misunderstanding, but I could tell the jury wasn't buying it. The video was too clear, Patricia's threats too obvious. After I was done testifying, I stayed to watch the rest of the trial. Other witnesses were called: FBI agents who'd investigated the financial records, contractors who'd paid kickbacks and were now cooperating, other homeowners who'd been victimized. Sarah Winters testified about her roof. She broke down crying on the stand as she described working overtime shifts, missing her daughter's school events, struggling to pay the loan. The jury looked shaken. The prosecution presented financial records showing deposits from contractors into Patricia's account, emails discussing which properties to target, recorded phone calls where Patricia and contractors discussed splitting fees. The evidence was overwhelming. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to argue that Patricia genuinely believed she was enforcing HOA rules, that the payments from contractors were for legitimate consulting services, that it was all a misunderstanding. But they couldn't explain away the sheer volume of evidence. The emails alone were damning. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Closing arguments were powerful. Jennifer Park methodically laid out the evidence, painting a picture of a calculated fraud scheme that had destroyed families and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. She pointed at Patricia and said, "This defendant abused her position of trust. She weaponized the HOA against innocent homeowners. She destroyed their finances, their peace of mind, their sense of security in their own homes, and she did it all for greed." The defense's closing argument was weaker. They tried to create reasonable doubt, to suggest that Patricia was just an overzealous volunteer, that mistakes were made but there was no criminal intent. but I could see from the jury's faces that they weren't convinced. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict: guilty on all counts: wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy. Patricia's face crumpled. She started crying, her lawyer putting a hand on her shoulder. The judge set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. I attended the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with victims wanting to see justice done. The judge allowed several people to give victim impact statements. Sarah stood up and talked about how the fraud had affected her family, her finances, her health. An elderly man talked about losing his retirement savings. A young couple talked about the stress-causing problems in their marriage. When it was time for sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. Ms. Henderson, you held a position of trust in your community. Homeowners relied on you to act in their best interests. Instead, you exploited that trust for personal gain. Your actions were calculated, sustained, and devastating to your victims. This court must send a message that such corruption will not be tolerated. She sentenced Patricia to 12 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to all victims, over $400,000 from just her HOA alone. Patricia would also have to forfeit all her assets. As marshals led Patricia away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, anger at what she'd done, and sadness that it had come to this, that someone had been so willing to hurt others for money. The other defendants received similar sentences over the following weeks. The contractors who'd paid kickbacks got lighter sentences in exchange for their cooperation, but they still faced prison time and had to pay restitution. The civil lawsuits followed quickly. I joined a class action lawsuit against the HOA itself, arguing that the organization had failed in its duty to properly oversee the board members. The case settled within 6 months. The HOA's insurance paid out a significant settlement to all the victims. It wasn't enough to make everyone whole, but it helped. For Sarah, the restitution and settlement meant she could pay off her fraudulent loan. She cried when she told me, said it felt like a weight had been lifted. She could finally breathe again. The Sunset Ridge. HOA underwent a complete overhaul. Emergency elections were held. New board members were elected, people who were transparent and committed to rebuilding trust. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations and provide oversight. They revised the bylaws to include more checks and balances to prevent any one person from having too much power. I was asked to join the new board. I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. But I did agree to serve on an advisory committee to help implement the reforms. The case had ripple effects throughout Arizona and beyond. State legislators introduced new laws to increase HOA oversight and transparency, requirements for independent audits, limits on fines and enforcement powers, mandatory disclosures of any financial relationships between board members and contractors. The laws passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Agent Chen called me after the last defendant was sentenced. I wanted to thank you one final time. This case wouldn't have happened without your quick thinking that morning. You helped us take down a major fraud network and get justice for over 100 families. I just did what anyone would do. You'd be surprised. Most people don't think to record interactions with authority figures. Most people don't have security cameras capturing everything. Most people would have just let it happen and tried to fight it later through the legal system. You stopped it in real time. That made all the difference. I'm just glad it's over. Me too. Take care of yourself, Oliver. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The news crews left. The reporters stopped calling. My neighborhood became quiet again. My guest house remained standing, of course. I'd never gotten around to finishing some of the interior details, so I spent the winter completing those projects. It felt therapeutic, working with my hands, creating something instead of just reacting to chaos. My father came to visit for Thanksgiving. He'd followed the entire case from Michigan, calling me constantly to check in. When he arrived and saw the guest house, he walked around it slowly, inspecting every detail. "This is beautiful work," he said. "I'm glad it's still here." "Me too, Dad. You did a brave thing, standing up to them like that." I didn't feel brave. I felt scared and angry. That's usually when bravery is required. He put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you." We had a quiet Thanksgiving, just the two of us and a couple of neighbors. Sarah came with her daughter, Emma, a bright 10-year-old with her mother's smile. Emma told me about her school play, about her friends, about the hamster she'd gotten for her birthday. She seemed happy and carefree. Sarah looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Thank you," she told me as she was leaving, "for everything. For connecting me with the FBI, for testifying, for just being a decent person when I needed one." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You gave me my life back." After they left, my father and I sat on the back porch, the same porch where I'd been sitting the morning everything happened. The McDowell Mountains were silhouetted against the sunset, turning purple and gold. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been filming?" my father asked. "All the time. If I hadn't called Agent Chen, if I hadn't recorded everything, Patricia might have gotten away with it. The guest house would be gone, I'd be out tens of thousands of dollars, and she'd still be out there running her scheme. Timing is everything. It really is." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out. I thought about all the people whose lives had been upended by Patricia's greed. I thought about how easily it could have been different, how one phone call had changed everything. The next morning, I was checking my email when I found a message from a journalist at the Arizona Republic. She was writing a feature story about HOA fraud and wanted to interview me. I'd turned down dozens of similar requests over the months, but something about this one felt different. She wasn't looking for sensationalism. She wanted to explore the systemic issues, the reforms that were needed, the lessons that could be learned. I agreed to the interview. We met at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, and I told her everything. Not just about my case, but about the broader implications. About how HOAs have enormous power over people's homes and lives, about how that power can be abused without proper oversight, about how important it is for homeowners to know their rights, to document everything, to speak up when something feels wrong. The article ran in January. It was thoughtful and comprehensive, discussing not just the fraud case, but the larger issues around HOA governance. It sparked a new round of discussions about reform. Community meetings were held. More legislators got involved. The momentum for change continued building. In March, I received a letter from the FBI. It was from Agent Chen, but it was formal, on official letterhead. The letter thanked me for my cooperation in the investigation and informed me that the case had been closed successfully. All the defendants had been sentenced, restitution was being paid out, and the investigation into the broader network was complete. But the last paragraph caught my attention. "Your actions on the morning of April 15th exemplify the kind of civic responsibility that makes our justice system work. By documenting the crime as it happened and immediately alerting law enforcement, you not only protected yourself, but helped protect countless other potential victims. The FBI commends your quick thinking and courage." I kept that letter, framed it actually, and hung it in my office. Not because I'm particularly proud of myself, but as a reminder. A reminder that ordinary people can make a difference, that standing up to corruption matters, that documenting injustice and speaking truth to power can change lives. The guest house became something of a symbol in my mind. It represented resilience, the idea that good things don't have to be torn down by bad people. Every time I walked past it, I thought about that morning, about how close I'd come to losing it, about how everything had changed in those few crucial minutes. I started using the guest house differently after that. Instead of just family visits and workspace, I opened it up to neighbors who needed a quiet place. Sarah used it sometimes when she had to study for nursing certifications and needed silence. Another neighbor, a writer, used it when he had deadlines. An elderly woman recovering from surgery stayed there for a week when she couldn't handle stairs at her own house. It felt right, turning something that had almost been destroyed into something that helped people. By summer, life had fully returned to normal. The HOA functioned smoothly under new leadership. Newsletters went out regularly, keeping everyone informed. Financial statements were published quarterly. Decisions were made transparently. It was what an HOA should have been all along. I ran into the demolition foreman at a hardware store one day. He recognized me immediately. "Hey, you're the guy with the guest house. I saw the news about the whole FBI thing. Glad I trusted my gut that morning." "Me too. Thank you for that, by the way, for insisting on proper documentation." He shrugged. "It's just business. I've been in construction 30 years, and I've learned that cutting corners always comes back to bite you. When something doesn't smell right, you walk away. That's good advice. How's the guest house? Still standing, I hope. Still standing. Want to see it? He followed me back to my house, and I gave him the full tour. He was impressed by the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the quality of the materials I'd used. "This is solid work," he said, running his hand along a doorframe. "Would have been a crime to tear this down." It really would have. As he left, he turned back to me. "You know, that whole situation made me more careful about who I work for. I turned down 3 HOA jobs after that because something felt off about the way they were approaching things. Your story reminded me to trust my instincts. I'm glad something good came out of it." More good continued to come. The state laws that had been passed led to real reforms across Arizona. HOAs had to be more transparent, more accountable. Homeowners had more protections, more recourse when they disagreed with board decisions. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I heard from Agent Chen one last time, almost a year after the initial arrest. He called me out of the blue on a Saturday morning. "Oliver, it's Marcus Chen. How are you?" "I'm good. What's going on?" "I wanted to let you know that we just closed another HOA fraud case in Tucson. Similar scheme, similar corruption. But this time, the homeowners knew what to look for because of the publicity around your case. They documented everything, called us early, and we were able to shut it down before it got too big." "That's great news." "It is, and it's partly because of you. Your case educated people about what HOA fraud looks like, how to recognize it, what to do about it. You helped people beyond just your own neighborhood." "I never thought about it that way." "Well, it's true. Anyway, I just wanted you to know. The work we did together, it's still making a difference." After we hung up, I sat with that thought. The idea that my experience, as stressful and awful as it had been, might have helped other people avoid the same fate. It didn't make what happened okay, but it gave it meaning. I walked out to the guest house and stood in the doorway, looking at the space I'd created. The morning light was streaming through the windows, illuminating the hardwood floors, the custom cabinets, the built-in bookshelves. Every detail represented hours of work, careful planning, love for the craft. Patricia had wanted to destroy this, for money, for greed, for kickbacks from contractors who would have poorly rebuilt what they'd demolished, completing the cycle of fraud. But she hadn't succeeded. The guest house stood, the fraud was exposed, justice was served, and life went on, better and more honest than before. I thought about all the people who'd been affected by the case. Sarah and her daughter, finally free of crushing debt. The elderly couple who got their retirement savings back through restitution. The young family who'd sold their house at a loss but received enough from the settlement to buy a new home in a different neighborhood. Agent Chen and his team who'd worked tirelessly to bring criminals to justice. The legislators who'd passed reforms, the journalists who'd told the story, the new HOA board members who were doing things right. One person's corruption had hurt many people, but many people working together had stopped it, had fixed it, had made sure it couldn't happen again as easily. That seemed like the real lesson. Not that one person can save the day, but that one person can start something, can make a phone call, can press record on a camera, can stand up and say, "This is wrong." And then others can join in, can add their voices and their efforts until change actually happens. I heard my father calling from the main house, asking if I wanted breakfast. I took one last look at the guest house, at this structure that had become more than just a building, and headed back inside. Life was good. Justice had been served, and my guest house stood as a reminder that sometimes, when you document the truth and refuse to back down, you can actually win against corruption. The demolition crew never came back. Patricia Henderson was in federal prison. The FBI had their convictions. The victims had their restitution. And I had my guest house, still standing, still solid, still mine. That morning when I'd heard the rumble of heavy machinery, I'd had no idea how much my life was about to change. I'd just been a homeowner trying to protect his property. But by the time it was all over, I'd helped expose a major fraud network, assisted in putting criminals in prison, and contributed to legal reforms that would protect thousands of other homeowners. All because I'd been filming it all for the FBI. Well, Technically, I'd been filming for myself at first and then for the FBI once I realized what was happening. But the important thing was that I documented everything. In an age where everyone has a camera in their pocket, that documentation had made all the difference. I made myself a promise that day, standing in my guest house with the Arizona sun streaming through the windows. If I ever saw injustice happening again, if I ever witnessed corruption or abuse of power, I would document it. I would speak up. I would do what I could to stop it. Because that's what good neighbors do. That's what good citizens do. They don't just protect their own property, they protect each other. They stand up for what's right. They refuse to let bad people destroy good things. My guest house would always remind me of that. Every time I looked at it, I would remember the morning it almost came down, and the year of struggle that followed, and the justice that finally prevailed. Some stories have neat, simple endings. This one didn't. Not really. The effects of the case continued rippling outward long after the trial ended. But if I had to mark an ending, it would be this moment. Standing in my guest house, knowing it was safe, knowing the people who'd tried to destroy it were in prison, knowing that the system had worked. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it had worked, and that was enough. I walked back to the main house where my father was making coffee. We spent the rest of the morning talking about ordinary things, sports, politics, his garden back in Michigan, my plans to finally take a vacation somewhere quiet and peaceful. Normal life. The kind of life Patricia Henderson had tried to disrupt for profit. The kind of life that, thanks to documentation, quick thinking, and a dedicated FBI agent, I got to keep living. The guest house stood behind us, solid and permanent, a testament to the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win.